Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 747. I'm Jon M Quigley, your host. Today, we continue our exploration of fatalism's impact on change in organizations. Listen to part 1 back in SPaMCAST 745. Link in the show notes. Fatalism does not have to be permanent. How that transition away from fatalism can be made varies depending on context. In this installment of the series, we'll look at a few approaches to tackling the problem. We'll also have a visit from Jon M Quigley. Jon and I discuss succession planning and why planning needs to be more diverse to support organizational health. A few approaches for combating fatalism in organizational change by Thomas M. Quigley Jr., Megan E. Quigley. Some of the most celebrated stories in business literature are where people did not accept rules. One of my favorites tells the story of a Federal Express employee. Yeah, that was before they became FedEx. They picked up the whole drop-off box and took it back to the station because their key wouldn't work. They acted and accepted responsibility for their behavior. Years ago, a friend and colleague paid the ultimate price. My friend approved an emergency change to the department's website. When it went down, the change went into production without going through the change control board, which would have taken several days to meet. They knew what they had to do. Lives were at risk. It's a cool story. We can meet at Agile 2023 or Agile and beyond, and I'll tell you this story, and that there would be serious consequences. The person in both stories did not accept something was outside of their control, acted, and pushed forward. Taking responsibility for your actions is the first mechanism for combating fatalism. You own your attitude and your behavior. Recognizing those simple facts, simple but not always easy, puts you in a position to understand that you can change how you feel and how you act. Another nasty form of fatalism is hindsight bias. Quips like, "I always knew this wouldn't work," is a hindsight bias used to generate closure and to abrogate responsibility for the outcome. Falling into this habit tends to poison whole teams. "I told you so" remarks generate distrust for decisions they make, causing them to believe they cannot affect the outcome of the work they do. Again, taking responsibility for your action is an integral part of the solution to this type of fatalism. When a whole team falls prey to this type of problem, consider a timeline retrospective to identify the inflection points in a program or time frame. Identifying where things change during the time period provides a platform to explore how teams and individuals' decisions made a difference. Seeing that the action of people or individuals on the team had an impact is empowering. This type of retrospective can also help people identify the biases that influence decision-making. This approach is useful at the individual level as well as for a team. Another set of approaches to combating fatalism draws on the experience of others with different mindsets. This might mean extending your circle of relationships, but can be an effective tool in behavior modification. The term behavior modification sounds clinical, but what are the common coaching techniques of pairing, modeling, and role-playing if not tools for behavior modification? Seeing someone working on the same goal as you builds confidence that your actions will influence the outcome. Combining observation and action builds muscle memory. As an Agile coach in all forms, you are not a healthcare professional and have no standing to diagnose or treat a healthcare problem. That said, I don't see common organizational fatalism as a healthcare issue, though it could affect the health of the organization if left untreated. Empowering people and teams are table stakes for effective Agile. Fatalism is the antipathy of empowerment. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. We look forward to the conversation. Jon M Quigley, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, brother.
Thank you. Your alpha and omega of product development is a favorite. Jon, today, succession planning. I think everybody ought to be doing succession planning, and they ought to make sure that they keep that really tight in terms of only working on succession planning with the people that are the closest to I'm kidding. Jon.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know why you're saying that. It is possible to get me to rise and take the bait.
I knew I was winding you up.
Yeah, I'm going to look up at that and go, I know there's a hook in that. I'm not going to just take that like that.
All right. So in terms of running an organization, any organization, what is succession planning and why do we care?
Well, succession planning, in my experience, is you have key people in your organization that do things at a certain level. It doesn't matter the level. Eventually, those people are going to retire, move on, maybe leave, maybe, God forbid, some bad things happen to them and they're unable to do their job anymore. Host of factors, right? They won't be there at some point. We all have this limited life cycle, so it's going to happen, period. So succession planning is figuring out how to get the knowledge, the tribal knowledge, and all those other things of the organization's future into those people in a pipeline, so that when one falls, we have n number of people that could replace that person, and we essentially can keep going as best we can given what we've been dealt, the hand we've been dealt.
So why don't we just assume that we'll be able to live with sort of transactional knowledge? I'll have a little bit of it and everybody knows that I have it, and that's how we'll work. We'll just have a network of transactional knowledge, and when somebody plugs out, we'll be able to, I guess, through that succession planning, just plug somebody else in.
Yeah, that's part of the issue right there. The thing is, people encounter different circumstances, right? And even worse, their interpretation or the lessons that are learned of this encountering of this circumstance may vary. So even if you experience the same thing I experienced, you may come away with a whole different set of causes, reasons, or take away lessons and things like that. This is the reason why you really need to spread your learning around anyway, because you could be wrong, I could be wrong. If I look at it from my perspective, I'm probably going to be entrenched in that because I see it the way I see it. If I never hear about yours, I never am available to a counterpoint to how this thing turned out the way it did. I worked at a company where I heard a manager say, it's okay to make mistakes, but can't we make a different one? Can't we make different ones? And the reason he said that was because some pockets of the company learned something while others did not. So this is the reason why you kind of want to distribute the knowledge anyway, right? Now, how this is connected to succession planning is, instead of having that single transactional source interface one-to-one kind of thing, you have many-to-one opportunities for that, right? So instead of, I know this person is competent because I've been dealing only with this one person and they share, I've seen some elements of competency, they can maybe take my place. You have a bunch of people, and you likely already do have a bunch of people that could take that spot.
Well, how would you know that? I think there's a whole lot of psychology that says people tend to, if left to their own devices, tend to group together and, like people that they like and not like people they don't like. And so there's generally, left to their own devices, diversity tends to go down for diversity of intellect, thought, and things like that.
That's a fact, for sure. Or even things like the halo and horns effect. If I like you because you've done one thing good, now all of a sudden you've done one thing I value. You're obviously a good person, and I will consider you for a whole bunch of other things. Versus, for example, I'm not late. I will not be late. If I'm late, something bad's going to happen. It's because something bad has happened. So when I see somebody else show up late, I attribute bad things to them being late because I value being on time. They don't value that. So I look at them with some suspicion, and I'm going to attach, they're just not as motivated or in the game as I think they should be. That can't be true at all. Probably isn't true at all.
Probably. Well, who knows, right? Who knows? That's the problem with those cognitive biases. They are very difficult to see through. In terms of product development, software development, how can an organization do a better job at succession planning?
I think that one thing we need to get away from is the thinking of the one-to-one kind of succession planning method. I've worked at big companies, and I've seen people who are interested in making
one-to-one.
Okay, like I'm a VP of something or a manager in a department, and I see only one person that can be doing that succession. I spend my time on this one person, or maybe not all of it, but the most of it, grooming this one person to take my spot. That's sort of what I'm considering here.
Well, isn't that like what we see at football teams in the U.S. here? Whoever is the first string quarterback gets all the practice snaps. Then the second string might get a few of the practice snaps, and the poor third string person who is probably never going to play doesn't get any of the snaps. And I don't know what they really do, except in San Francisco, which happened this year, right? Yeah, they ended up going through 4 quarterbacks. Yep. And those third string quarterbacks who never got any in terms of the snaps in the succession planning, one of them actually did very well. But when they got to the number 4 guy, it didn't work out well for them.
Yeah, and we're surprised. We act like they probably felt like they had a surprise when the guy has not been working with the team and has spent as many hours as he could probably studying the manuals and stuff, because essentially that's what he has he's relegated to, because he's not getting any physical time. Exactly. And, textbooks only carry us so far, for sure.
Absolutely. Real life experience and context is highly important. So people shouldn't go 1-for-1. Should they go 100-to-1? What's sort of is there an equation, or is there some sort of approach that one would think about?
I can't think of an equation for this, but many things don't really distill down to engineer at heart that I am. I like it when things distill down to equations, but the reality is, people, that's not going to work. It's not how it works. But I think there are some things we can do. The thinking that one person on our team or one group, one person, we should have one person in mind for our succession plan. I don't think that's valid. I don't think that's helpful. It's probably, a small percentage of the time that will work. But you got to know you're probably demoralizing some of your team when they realize there's no sense in applying for that next job, because you already know who you want to have, that job. And so your team gets the perspective that you have to be from this over here to get a position like this in the company. That means they either have to treat this thing, instead of like a career, it becomes more like a job, or they have to leave your company where somebody would treat them more like they have a career. That's sort of the position you're putting them in. And if you demoralize them to the point where they think they have a job, then you're probably not getting every bit of engagement out of them.
We're back to that word engagement. We've been there a few times, haven't we?
Yeah, without it, you got nothing. So there is that. So I think what you need to do is contrive instances in your work where, as anybody you think could be a candidate is learning new things that would help you to understand their capability and their motivation in this context. And then it becomes kind of an experience path, right? You set them up in these situations and see how they do. and learn from that, and they learn from that, and you coach them through it if they don't do well. And the ones, and you'll probably see some fall out that are not interested in this being part of a succession plan. There's plenty of people who get a job and they're like, this is good for me. It pays my bills and I'm more focused on these other things anyway.
Yeah, I don't meet very many of those these days. At least
I don't either, but
they must exist. Jon, succession planning, a good thing if it's done correctly, correct?
Correct, yes.
If people wanted to continue the conversation with you on succession planning, how it fits into the product development world, how would they go about doing that?
Connect with me on LinkedIn, Jon M Quigley, or send me an email, jon.quigley@valuetransform.com.
Jon, always a pleasure, sir. Looking forward to next month.
Same here, Tom. Me too. I'm always looking forward to having these chats with you.
In Reread Saturday News, today we reread Chapter 20 of Extraordinary Badass Agile Coaching, the journey from beginner to mastery and beyond. Bob notes that Stephen Covey's 7th habit in his classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which we reread many years ago, is sharpening the saw. This is a reminder that who and where we are today can't be who and where we are tomorrow. This habit is a prescription for balanced self-renewal. This is the last chapter of Extraordinary Badass. Next week, we'll discuss the afterword and final thoughts. Buy a copy, read, go back and read along. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 748, we'll feature our interview with Bob Galen. Bob and I will discuss Extraordinary Badass Agile Coaching, sort of a wrap-up to the reread. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?